In the dead of night, when the moon is high and ill winds blow, and the banshees cry and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
Good evening. It is 12 midnight, the Paranormal Hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. I'm your host, Chief Lawson. Ghost to Ghost is a podcast to discuss all paranormal and parapsychology subjects. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats, so tell your friends, tell your family. Come listen to Ghost to Ghost. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is that hour. It is the midnight hour. It is time for Ghost to Ghost. Tonight's topic, the Black Moon Manor, the haunted house that was not. Okay, so tonight's a little unique, and I'm going to introduce my co-host this evening, Heather Lawson, our case manager and podcast director.
Hello.
Mia Kerr, our social media manager and public relations manager.
Hey there.
And Eric Kerr, our research manager and assistant podcast director.
Good evening.
So tonight, this is a unique subject. You know, we do a lot of things because our whole podcast is based on hauntings and parapsychology. But tonight, we talk about maybe a little bit of fraudulism that fooled a lot of people for a bit. And so I'm going to turn this over to Eric. He did the research on this, him and Mia both, and they did a great job. So I'm going to let them start out and tell me a little bit about Black Moon Manor.
Well, Chief, I think you hit the nail on the head. So it's more of the was it not, maybe it was. It's a little bit of everything, to be honest with you. So when we started doing the research for this, it was a topic that I think a lot of local people in the paranormal community know about. Probably not so much people outside our area of Indianapolis, but one of the things I learned quickly is that even people that knew about it didn't really know the story.
But they didn't want to, maybe to a certain degree.
No, I think that everybody wanted it to be incredibly true.
Yeah.
Well,
every haunted site, you want the evidence to be true. You want it to be a haunted site. When you find out it isn't, it's kind of an embarrassment, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think you're going to find, as we get further into this, that there's probably a shred of truth to it.
Yeah.
But we can't really say with 100% certainty what that truth really is. There's something there.
Sure.
It's not a house anymore, but there's something there that's maybe attached to the land, but we don't know really the source of it at this point.
I always tell everybody, being a Freemason, pretty much all of our lodges are haunted. You know, and I'm probably going to get in a lot of trouble for that statement. But anyway, you know, the thing is, a lot of these guys were more attached to the order than they were their own home. And it's not a thing to be ashamed about. It's not a thing to say, oh my God, they didn't love their families that much. No, that's not the case. They loved the experience they received there. I think all buildings, to a certain degree, are somewhat haunted. I've heard this theory, and I think it was actually done by either Hosler or maybe I read it by Price. I don't remember, but it's been years and years ago, obviously. But this theory was brought out that all buildings have a certain amount of hauntings. Depending on the amount of energy, depends upon how much the haunting presents itself. So, you know, I think even the buildings we think aren't haunted may be haunted. We just can't see them or they're not that active. So it's a possibility.
True.
You know.
Everything's energy, so
Exactly.
it just changes form, so it just kind of depends on
how much form
what
and
was
how much
done
is there. Exactly.
Or if it was built on an Indian burial ground.
That actually brings out an interesting point that I was about to make, because going back to the history, the family, which there are a few different families involved. The house was known as, I'm going to call it the Estes, although it looks like it's Eastus, and I apologize if I get it incorrect, but I'm going to go with the Estes and then the Harvey family. So they came to what is now Greenfield, Indiana, Buck Creek Township, Hancock County. They purchased the land that it's on June 6th, 1834. So they were actually, they're known to be one of the first families, if not the first family, that was not Native American. to the area. It was very much a Native American area, which, as Mia said, that could also be part of the source of
And wasn't it like 180 acres or
180
something
acres
that they bought? Yeah.
180 acres. So the patriarch of the family was Obadiah Estes. He was born in 1758 and he passed away in 1847. He married Frances Harvey. She was born in 1774 and passed in 1854. So the Estes and the Harvey families have a history going back to when they got married in South Carolina. So they followed a very similar migratory pattern. They went from, originally, the Estes family came from Halifax County, Virginia. And then they got married in Edgefield District, South Carolina. And then Old Lincoln County, Kentucky. And then to Franklin County, Indiana, to Hancock. So usually that pattern followed looking for good places to farm.
Sure.
They wanted to go further west and further north until they found a place that was fertile and they could make a living. And so that's pretty much how they ended up here. Obadiah served in the War of 1812 in the East Tennessee Militia Clark's Battalion. He was a private. And families tended to follow other family members rather than venture out on their own. That's something we'll talk about that. So that's how they got to Buck Creek Township. Now, the next thing is, how did this folklore start? What is actually true about this story? A lot of people, when you talk to them about Black Moon Manor, they'll know just that there were known hauntings or suspected hauntings. They don't necessarily know about what really happened there. One of the stories that people tend to hear about or know a little bit about is that supposedly there was a smallpox clinic that was operated in the home. Okay. We're going to talk about that because that's debunked.
Oh, okay.
But what is true is that Dr. J.W. Harvey, which is related to the family, he was born in Franklin County, Indiana, in 1819. His father died when he was young. The mother was a single mother of 5, having a hard time making it. Yeah, 5 kids. That's expensive. And they didn't even have inflation like they have now. I can't even imagine that.
Kids are expensive in any age.
Oh, yeah. I don't care what time of period it is. It's expensive.
They worked the farm.
So, yes, they did. So she moved.
That was one advantage. You got those as free labor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Work. Yeah.
I don't have any
That's
of
why
those.
you have kids.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So she moved the family back to where she was from, which was Butler County, Ohio, which is metro Cincinnati, northern Cincinnati. JW, by the way, stands for James Walter, and he attended college in the Cincinnati area. He was being trained as a doctor.
Which is good, because most people of that era didn't attend college. It had to be for a doctor or a lawyer or something along those lines.
Yes. Well, he ran out of money. So he was trying to go to Chicago. He figured that was the closest large city where he could go to make money so he could come back and follow his dream of being a doctor.
Sure.
So he decided to move to Chicago. And so he's on his way to Chicago. And he got as far as Mount Comfort, which is the greater area where Buck Creek Township is now.
Yep.
And he went to stay with the family and didn't leave. And this was 1843. For reference of where this is, for those who don't know, Greenfield is on the east side of Indianapolis, about 15 miles outside of downtown, just across the county line.
Yes.
In Hancock County. So this happened a lot. I have a background in genealogy, and this happened a lot. People went to visit their families, and they had all these grand plans, and then they go to see their family, and all of a sudden the grand plans stop. They stay. And
well, they were committed to their families back then.
Yes.
So, if there was illness or something that would derail their plans, and they would stay, they felt committed to stay and help.
Yes.
And they didn't have cars, so
Exactly.
I'm sure getting from here to Chicago on a horse and buggy is going to take a long time.
If you're riding stagecoach, more than likely the stagecoach didn't stop in Greenfield, so you had to get back in Indianapolis and then catch it from there. Or a train. There was trains were popular then. Yeah.
This is 1843.
Yeah.
some of the stories I read about, these were like very long day trips to go like 5 miles or 10 miles. It was like a whole day.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Going into town.
Yeah.
Going into town.
Need anything?
Yeah. And that happened a lot. A lot of people would ask their neighbors, hey, we're going in. Do you need anything? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's common. Yeah.
So let's talk about the history of the land.
Okay.
So Dr. Hervey made it to Hancock County in 1843.
Okay.
The truth of the matter is he could not have operated a smallpox clinic in the home. He was there for 16 years. The home was not actually built until the late 1860s. The dates are a little fuzzy because the record keeping was a little suspect. Mm-hmm. People have tried to go back and find exact dates, and it's been really difficult to get that information. Mm-hmm. But it was built in the 1860s. So he could not have operated a smallpox clinic in that house because it wasn't built.
Yeah, at that time. Yeah.
So that
this isn't the first time we ran into inaccuracies. I mean, that's one thing about research. A lot of people say, well, I don't like doing research. We get a little bit of the bias from, the research. Well, you shouldn't. I mean, you should always be subjective to whatever you get. But research a lot of times will tell you the truth and the untruths about any location or any incident. So,
and it's funny you mention that because this is a location that, although maybe it's not extremely well known outside of the area,
sure,
it was well known enough to make it onto certain television shows like Ghost Adventures. I have watched that episode, and I'm just going to chalk it up to research. Yeah. But we'll leave it at that. It was research.
I'm going to take. I got to say, if I don't, I feel bad the rest of my life. That was always my favorite. Because I don't watch Ghost Adventures. I'm not going to say one way or another, but I don't watch them regularly. But that was my favorite episode because of one little incident where he's walking out of the library after research, looks at this young man, says, "Are you here to rent a book?" And the kid starts screaming, "Stranger danger." I'm thinking, oh my God, this is good. If I had a TV show, that'd be on the cutting room floor. But anyway, he put it in. I thought, this is just too good. It sums it all up in one word: stranger danger.
True.
I will tell you, the camera crew in that episode actually got a great giggle out of it.
Oh, God,
it was amazing.
Yes, they were all enjoying it. I think the only other episode that was better was the one he was at the, I think the Limp Mansion. I can't remember which mansion. It was a Masonic. And he walked into the door.
Right into the door.
Yeah, the cameraman was supposed to be guiding him. He guided him right into the end of like this 4-inch thick door. And
oh my goodness!
Here's thud. It echoes. He looks around. Says, "God damn it! You're supposed to be watching me." That's great. I love it.
So the house was built in the 1860s. We believe the late 1860s, around 1869 or so. Mm-hmm. It had been inhabited off and on over the years, and it stayed within the Estes family. Mm-hmm. They did have renters from time to time, and me and I were talking about this today. It's not explicit, but we believe that the renters started coming in around the 60s or 70s.
Okay, makes sense.
And it actually continued on through the 80s and 90s, but they were sporadic. The owner of the house was a descendant of the Estes. It's a gentleman who now is about 90 years old.
And he's still named Estes,
No,
right?
he's 79.
He's 79.
He's 79. He was born in 45.
Now, he doesn't live locally, though.
No.
Yeah.
He lives out of town, and so that actually
He
plays
lives in
into what
Ohio.
happened.
Yeah.
He lives in Ohio. So the house had fallen into a state of disrepair because of the renters. Nobody was really taking care of it, and he was out of the state.
Sure.
He was not able to really come back and do a lot with it. There were a lot of break-ins, trash dumping. There were thoughts about there could have been some unsavory occult
Squatters.
Going on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So fast forward to 2005. Mr. Estes was approached by a gentleman who wanted to rent or lease the home, and he was very explicit that it was going to be for the purposes of a haunted attraction. Mm-hmm. Because this is extremely public, I feel comfortable talking about it. So it's a gentleman named Matt Speck.
Okay.
Yes.
He applied to the Hancock County Zoning Board to have it zoned for a haunted tourist attraction.
Sure.
And
much like a theatrical haunted house.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they're like, "Thanks for playing." No. And so they told him no.
In short, that's take your country ass back to wherever you came from, not happening in our area.
Exactly
Right,
correct.
right.
For frame of reference, this is and I'm sure at that time it was even more so. Indy's growing now, but it was so incredibly rural. It's farmland, corn, wheat.
Well, I was a kid, the airport on Mount Comfort wasn't a Indianapolis International derivative airport. That was just Mount Comfort Airport.
Yeah.
The only thing that ever came out there was they had an air show once a year. And, one year you get the Blue Angels, next year you get Thunderbirds, next year you get Golden Knights. But you always got the Confederate Air Force to bring in all the, the old planes. And, I mean, that was the big thing that happened out there. Otherwise, it was for a lot of private pilots. I mean, you didn't get much more than that.
So you can imagine the locals didn't think a whole lot about it either.
Sure, yeah.
They kind of came out in mass. So once he was denied by the zoning board, he wasn't done. He decided that he still wanted to rent the house, and he explained to Mr. Estes that he wanted to rent the house and use it as storage.
Sure.
And he would upkeep the property.
Yes, he would mow the lawn, upkeep the property, and keep keep it from falling into further disrepair.
So he only charged him $100 a month.
Wow.
I don't know the last time I've seen a rent of $100 anywhere.
You can't get a
Just using
storage
it for
rental.
storage,
You can't get a storage rental for that. I think our storage rental, we got a 10 by 25, which is very small, probably in that respect. It's $150 a month.
Yeah.
I mean, and oh my God, yeah, that's cheap.
Maybe because he was going to upkeep the property.
Yeah, that was the thing. He didn't have to deal with it. Upkeep it, yeah.
I'm going to have Mia talk about this a little more because I believe she has some more information. But basically, once they made the agreement for the $100 per month, Mr. Speck created a backstory about the house, and he moved forward with the plans to turn it into what is now known as Black Moon Manor.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. so in this backstory, the family members will tell you just point blank. The Eastis and Harvey family members think that their names were dragged through the mud. The reputation was important to them. As the first families in the area, it was incumbent upon them to live a good life and to live a lawful life and to not be involved in something like this. So their community reputation would have
been scandalous.
Oh,
scandalous.
Yeah.
I
mean, we always say in Freemasonry, reputation is one thing, but your character is another. Your character is based upon all the things you do in life. I always tell people I'm too old to worry about my reputation. I don't give a shit anymore. But anyway, it's like the old story. I didn't say this was a good plan, but I said, let's do it. Yeah, it's kind of that kind of thing. But
Didn't say it was a good plan, just a plan.
Yeah, we ought to do it. It sounds like a load of fun. But I can see why this would ring to their very soul. I mean, I really do.
So, Mia, do you want to talk a little bit about...
For him to rent this as storage and then go ahead behind Mr. Estes' back and do the haunted attraction anyway. So Mr. Estes didn't have a clue what was going on. I mean, I'm sure maybe some neighbors called him up and said,
At
hey,
some point,
what's
I
going on?
always tell people that,
You know what's going on over there?
Everybody
Right.
knows everybody.
Being a fire chief, I always tell you, when you deal with code enforcement, 9 times out of 10, if you're in the country, how code enforcement find, because in the city of Indianapolis, I'll tell this right on the air, there's like 4 or 5 people that investigate violations of code enforcement. They have to do the entire area of Indianapolis and all of Marion County. 5 people. How most things get found out is your neighbor dimes you out. The neighbors are the best code enforcement employees you'll ever see. And we have a couple across the street that are that way. And, I find it amusing all the time. But anyway, they'll do that. And that's the quickest way in the world to get caught.
But he was claiming that Dr. J.W. Harvey actually operated the smallpox clinic in the home, which of course we said was not true. He claimed that over 200 people passed away from smallpox and that they buried them all in the backyard.
Oh God.
Now
That's
that's a hell of a backyard, let me tell you. We can bury 200 people in the field behind us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is an Estes Harvey cemetery, but it's on like the very far back corner. it's like the actual opposite corner
It's
of
family plot,
where
isn't
the
it?
house was. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So that was not true. It was not a funeral parlor. 200 people didn't die. Now, one thing that is true, well, he was claiming that there was a little girl named Rachel who passed away in the home and that she remained there to that day, playing in her playroom. There was a 4-year-old girl named Rachel Estes who passed away around 5. I'm not even sure how she passed away. I mean, back
Probably
then...
some kind of childhood disease.
Yeah.
Now, in
you know.
1847, there was a smallpox epidemic.
That's true. Yeah.
So that when these tales got spun, it was easier to believe it because there was actually
And what year was it?
1847.
Okay, I know 1820 something had the Spanish flu. I mean, there were
That's
several
correct.
things that happened. Yeah.
Now, in 1847, Dr. Harvey was there, and he did treat 84 smallpox patients.
But not at that house.
There's no way he could have. The
Yeah.
house didn't exist.
Exactly.
But he was actually able to save the lives of 79. So that's a pretty good percentage
Yeah.
with medicine what it was.
Yes.
And I tell you
Yeah.
what, I mean, I hate to say this, but, give the devil his due. Obviously, did a lot of research to come up with this backstory. He did the work. It's like they always told me in the Navy, if it takes that much time to do it wrong, if you just did that much effort, you could have done it right in the first time and never had to
Right.
worry about it.
Well, then he wouldn't have had all of these, like, fantastical
great stories.
Yeah, that
to
were
go
gonna-
with. Because he claimed all these people died. Okay, well, the only known death in the home was, or not in the home or on the property, I mean, was Rachel at 5 years old.
And what year did she die, do you know?
1842,
Yeah, so...
she passed away.
5 years before smallpox.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that. There's no information that we found.
Now, she is buried in the family cemetery back
sure.
there. We
Well,
have
now that way, if you go out toward New Palestine, you have the, what is it, Cinnameyer? I think Cinnameyer. They have their own cemetery. I mean, everybody that had property, because most people in those areas were farmers. They owned a couple, 200 acres. So a lot of those folks, the roads are named after them, Mount Comfort
yeah.
and everything. They're named after towns or people. And so it's nothing unusual to see those small, and you didn't have major cemeteries. If you were in the city of Indianapolis, you were buried in Crown Hill or Green Lawn.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you were out there, you had your own family plot.
There's one that we
You might
saw.
be buried in the church.
Yeah, that could
Actually,
be. Yeah,
Dr.
yeah.
Harvey is actually buried at Crown Hill.
Okay, very good.
Yes. We drove by there today just to see. You can see where the driveway used to be,
Yes.
and then right kind of catty corner to that is another cemetery. It was Lawson something.
It's across
Yeah,
the
I
county
have
road.
family. I have family here somewhere that has a
Yeah.
cemetery, so that might be ours. Yeah.
So there's a very small enclosed cemetery there, but there was an Estes in that cemetery because his
I
wife
kinda
was
wonder
a Lawson.
if Estes isn't the same Estes that owns Estes Machine Shop and Landscaping at the corner of Midhofer and English, because there's an Estes there. A friend of mine I went to high school with, he owns the Pasquale's Pizza here locally. And folks, you should buy a Pasquale's Pizza. It's very good. Tell him
It is
Chief.
very
Tell him
good.
Chief sent you. Yeah, he doesn't deliver this far anymore before we move, but he's a good friend of mine, and they call him the old man. But he, we were talking about that because he works there, and we were talking about this, but the fact that he works at Estes Machining, and it's a two-form factory. It's right there in the corner. Half of it's machining, half of it's landscaping. Makes one wonder. I actually knew an Estes in school in Warren Township. It was a female, and I don't remember her name now. It's been too long ago. A buddy of mine dated her. And it makes you wonder. But, when you start looking at these in this small of a community, and people go, Annapolis is not a small community. It is when you get out in the rural areas. It isn't hard to connect those.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was Arnett Louder.
Louder. Okay, louder.
So,
yeah.
but there was an Estes in there.
I guarantee one of her relation was a past master in my lodge. His last name was Louder.
The other thing I noticed about all of this is the
Beverly
names,
Louder.
the spellings always changed.
Yeah.
So as
there's
you're
reasons for that.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I know that a lot of times they would Americanize them.
Yes. Now, Heather can speak to that because her maiden name was Lair, but it was spelled originally. Go ahead.
Well, there's lots of different ways, but if go back far enough, it's Leher. Lair.
And that was what?
So
What genre of?
It's German.
ethnicity? German.
It's German.
Started as German.
And so there was a lot when they came to America. They changed it.
Yeah.
So even those who it's Lair now, and some
gotcha.
and had a D at the end. So my dad always says, if you go far enough back, we're all related to
To everybody.
everybody with last name Lair or
You go
Lair.
far enough back, Adam and Eve. I mean,
Oh,
you're
yeah,
Christian.
but
I mean, we all get there, but yeah.
yeah. Mia, do you want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what kind of goings on were happening with, like, keeping in mind, folks,
Yeah.
they were paying $100 a month in rent.
Yeah.
It was quite a good investment, and there was a good return. So
Unfortunately, I'm so glad we don't have that because we had that now. We still have a storage rental. But anyway,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it. Yeah.
Yeah, so Matt Speck had turned it into the haunted attraction. I read through a bunch of threads. There was a lot of paranormal groups, obviously, that went to
Sure.
explore. And he was charging $50 a head to get
yeah.
in there for, I don't know, a couple hours. And so one group specifically said, oh, well, we had at least 10 members go, so $500 for one night. And you imagine he's doing that. And then
He's not making bad money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's making a huge profit.
One night pays for his rent.
Yeah.
And then
for
some.
sure.
And then some. Next
Yeah.
5 months of rent. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
he's also paying somebody to do that upkeep for him.
He
was
the
wanting
mowing
to do.
crew or whatever. Yeah.
But he was also doing like escape rooms. He was locking people in for a certain amount of money, and they had to find keys. It was kind of Saw-esque because it was
Yeah.
when the Saw movies came out.
Yeah.
So just stuff
You know,
like
I've never
that,
really
yeah.
seen one of those. I've never.
No, it's interesting.
Yes.
I've never watched
Yeah.
the what
The
they call it,
ones
cut 'em up. I
before
never
he
get it.
got arrested, I think, are better.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember seeing the very first one in the movie theater. I think it was the only movie that the whole audience just kind of sat there at the end going, WTF? Like,
Yeah.
what just happened?
Well, you know, I always
idea.
tell
You
my
ever seen The
kids, I
Cell?
go, if you're gonna watch horror,
No, I don't
watch
think I have.
Jennifer
watch
Lopez.
good horror. So we do a
Okay.
lot of like, okay, my daughter, stepdaughter who's upstairs right now, we told her, we said, I want you to understand true quality horror films. The first one I put her through was The Fog, the old Fog, not the new Fog. It has Barbara Bravo. Anyway, I think every guy loved Barbara. And, you know, but she's in that one. We did Silver Bullet, Stephen King.
She liked that.
Oh, my God. The best one.
One
which
was Jaws.
Yeah, that they had nothing to do with paranormal, but
yeah.
oh my God, she was all over the chair. She kept yelling, screaming at the TV, no, don't do that.
What are you doing?
It was great. It was much more fun. I'd seen Jaws 100 times, but dear God, watching her was worth every penny. We did several sequences of The Thing. You got the 1950s version, and a lot of people
We
don't.
haven't had the kids watch that
No,
yet.
we haven't yet. And a lot of people don't realize that Elliot Ness, or not Elliot Ness, God. What was the guy's name? He was the guy that played Matt Dillon in Gunsmoke. He played the creature in the 1950s. And they interviewed him many years later in a talk show, and they said, why in the world would you take this? He said, well, this was 5 years before Gunsmoke. He said, this show provided me two things. It allowed me to live indoors and eat. And it had no lines. It was great.
Yeah.
And so he actually did that spot. Then you have the Carpenter version, which is a little gory, but oh my God, that scared the shit out of me the first night because it make you wonder. You know, it starts separating those around you, and of course it had Kurt Russell,
James Arness.
James Arness. There it is, James Arness. Kurt Russell was in that one, and oh my God, it was great. And we haven't done that yet. I don't think they'll sleep nights
Kurt
after
Russell
this.
was in the newer one. Not
Newer
the
one, the Carpenter version. Yeah, the
gotcha.
old 50s. The 50s, there was a funny spot. Heather loves it.
Close the damn door.
Yeah, you know, they're up in the Arctic, and there's this colonel or general, and they're coming in. Everybody comes in, has the door open way too long. He just yells, "Close the damn door!" So after about 5 guys come in to report, the one gentleman's getting ready to leave, and he says, "Yes, sir." And he says, "I'll and whatever happens, I'll close the damn door on the way out." And it's kind of a funny thing. A lot of the old movies have a lot of comedy, and people don't watch them, and they really miss out. I remember one spot, the photographer, when this creature's on the other side of the door, they open it, and they hit him with some sort of combustible, and then set it on fire and shut the door. And the photographer looks at him and goes, "I didn't get the picture." He says, "You want me to open the door again?" And, there's funny little innuendos throughout the whole movie. But, yeah, I mean, I think, and I may have forgot where we're going with this point, but, yeah.
Saw.
But we're on Saw. But I just never got into the old, chop 'em up movies. They don't make a lot of sense. And I'll end it with this. A buddy of mine ran a theatrical haunted house. He was a good guy. His name was Tom. He ran it for the Southport Softball League here. And I lived next door to where they were at. He asked me one time, he said, "Will you come over here and tell me what you think of the haunted house?" I said, "Well, I really don't do theatrical haunted houses. They really just aren't my thing." And, he says, "Well, I want to see if you can keep, my actors," and that's what I got known for, is keeping actors in their character. And I was single at the time, so I would always go over and come on to any of the women and, see if I could keep them from breaking their character. And he always loved that. And I looked at him, I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll go through yours if you go through one of mine." He says, "I'd rather pull my thumbnails out with pliers." He said, "I'll never go through a real haunted house." I mean, he was very, very upset about that. So, well, I'm sorry. Let's get back to Black Moon Manor. So anyway,
Manor.
Yep.
He had also claimed, one of the big ones was that I guess there was a big winter storm in 1978.
Yep, a blizzard.
A huge blizzard, and he claims that there was a woman living there. She froze to death in the corner of a room in a wheelchair, and I don't know how many days later, people in snowmobiles had to come in and get her out. That was all completely fabricated. Didn't he even say that he was related to her?
The claim was that he was the last surviving relative of this woman who froze to death.
Oh, God. Well, I'll tell you, 78 blizzard is still talked about legendly amongst Hoosiers. Oh, my God, it was horrible. I was 13. I remember the 78 blizzard. I lived through it.
I was just born.
Yeah.
Same.
It was the year, yeah. So I can tell you, my dad, I love to tell this story. My dad was the ultimate, man. He bought, before this had happened, I don't remember why, but he bought a snowblower. And these were fairly new. We bought it from Sears. He bought a lot of Craftsman items. And, this thing.
Is that the one we have?
Yeah, no, that's second model.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the first one had tank treads. I swear to God to you. He bought this thing, and it had tank treads and a headlight. And I looked at him, he says, "What do you think, son?" I didn't want to bust his balloon. I go, "Why does it have a headlight? Are we clearing snow at night?" He goes, "Goddamn it, son, you need a headlight at all times." Okay. And it had tank treads. We called it Godzilla because, this thing could eat a Volkswagen and spit it out. It had big treads, it had dual system in it. It was the best of the best when he bought it. And lo and behold, this blizzard comes in. Of course, they cancel school. I think I was in, I don't remember what grade I was in, probably junior high. But anyway, they cancel it.
Like 6th or 7th grade, I think.
Might have been, yeah. Might be. It's either right there,
Yeah.
junior high at 7th, or I was in the end of elementary. But I remember we had drifts. Oh, my God. And people, he was working at the Ford Motor Company plant here that's no longer existent. He came home, made sure he got it home. Most people, there was two types of people who stayed at the plant. Those that were looking for overtime, that thought if they stayed, they got paid more. And those that wanted the hell out of there because that's not where they wanted to be snowed in at. No. Dad was one of the latter, so he came home, and he had this 67 Chevy truck, of all things he drove. Just kind of a junker truck he took to the plant. We get in there, and it starts to fall, and I'm not kidding. It's falling a foot an hour for a while. This is the biggest snow we've ever seen in our life. Now, normally when I was a kid, we got snows before winter. Usually we got the ice in November, and we got the snows in December. Christmas was always white. We always had all this. Anyway, so we get like a 7-foot snow drift at the end of the drive. My dad goes, "All right, son, get your Arctic gear on. We got to go out. We got to clear the drive." I'm thinking, what the hell for? There's no place to go. If we could clear it to the road, there's still 7 foot of snow. Where the hell are we going? Now, there's nothing out there.
Was it still falling?
Oh, yeah. And
Okay,
so we put
why?
our Carhartts. I don't know. That was the question I asked. We put our
Makes no
Carhartts
sense.
on. I think it was to justify the amount of money he paid for this snowblower.
Gotta
Sure.
get his money's worth out
I
of it.
swear to God, we go out and we start clearing the drive. Now, our drive was L-shaped. It had a bump out, so it was straight with a bump out. we're clearing this drive, and we get it. Back then, I take back, I don't think we had to bump out back then. We clear this drive. It looks like a helipad. You know, it looks like that's because that's all it was good for. At the end of the drive, there's this 6-foot wall of snow that he carved off with a shovel. So that's it.
Goodness.
You know, you go to the end, and we had to move the truck 2 or 3 times to make it work to get around it, and the car. But we get it done. And he looks at me and says, "I'm so proud." And I'm going, "Why the fuck do we care? There'll be another 2.5 foot there tomorrow." And I mean, you know, but oh God, Dad was happy. He covered it up around outside the front door or back door. So we went out the back door. You walk about 8 inches, and then you were on top of the snowblower. And he couldn't wait to fire it up. I mean, we ran that thing 3 times. Now, the thing you remember is in '78, that blizzard only kept us down for 2 days. People went nuts. They thought, "Oh my God, I don't have enough food." I mean, Jesus Christ, we have enough food right now. We could last 3 months without hitting. We might be out of milk, but
Yeah, minus perishables.
yeah, I mean, but we've got milk in the freezer. We also have powdered milk. I mean, we have enough. We could make it for 3 months if we had to. We could then too, but nobody believed it. Everybody went nuts, and they were covering the AMPs and the IGAs and all that shit. And I never will forget it. And you know, Dad after then started this supply out on the shelf out in the what we call the utility rooms, 3 shelves. He had powdered milk. He had all kinds of. He bought tons of canned food. And of course, we've never had a blizzard since. But you know, that one, yeah, really got to him. Yeah,
We did have a pandemic, though.
yeah, and
Sounds a lot like toilet
and
paper
I learned a lot
supplies.
from my father. You know, I didn't go out and buy. Me and Heather didn't go out and buy, toilet paper. We didn't go out and buy because we buy at Costco right now. I have about 120 rolls on hand, but I buy them in an 80-roll container. And I mean, you know, it's easier just to keep that much on hand.
Yeah.
We have, I don't know, tons of stuff. There's 3 freezers. Right now, we gained some freezers for this house. We have like 6 freezers out there. I couldn't tell you how much meat we actually have. But anyway, during the pandemic, I had to laugh because we went out when everybody else was buying meat. And we spent $450 on booze. We wanted to make sure we had plenty. and a buddy of mine who used to be on the spirit team called and says, "Now, God damn it, I know I moved you. You have like 90 bottles." I go, "That's for guests. That's not shit we drink." We even bought a bottle of pickles that were pickled. This is double
Moonshine
oxymoron.
pickle.
Moonshine pickles.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
we bought
gosh.
$450 worth of booze. Everybody else is buying everything out. We're out getting
Wow.
enough drinks to make sure we're able to stay afloat. And I'll never forget it.
If there's a snowstorm, a big blizzard of 24,
Yeah.
we know where we're
Oh
coming.
yeah. I always told everybody. I said, you know, right
now we got room for you.
That's right.
I've got no less than 9 pork butts in the freezer.
Okay.
And that pork butt will feed about 40 people in the particular weight that I have.
Oh, my goodness.
And we've got brisket, we've got pork belly, we've got, there's a ton out there. We never have that problem. I look for snows to come because that means I don't have to go out and do anything. Now I can sit and watch TV and eat, and we're perfectly set. But a lot of people weren't in 78. I guess there's a lot of
Right.
people that really have problems. Our family really wasn't one of them. Dad had a good job. He worked at the Ford Motor Company plant. Mom worked at the bank, Merchants Bank. We had good money. And I mean, so he kept things bought up, but we were still middle class. But I mean, a lot of people weren't. So that was
Yeah.
a big thing in 78 was the blizzard. So
yeah.
The question I have is if there is a blizzard in 24 or 25 and
Yeah.
we come to stay with you,
yeah.
do we get the good stuff or the stuff for the guests?
Oh no, you get the good stuff. The blue room. If you haven't seen it, the blue bedroom has become very nice now.
Okay.
We've got Ethan Allen furniture and everything
Oh.
in it. We bought secondhand. It's really nice. We're working on the green room next. And as I told people, I said, if you want a shelter in place, this place to be. We have enough plate
Right.
carriers that we can outfit a small army.
Yeah.
And I said, this is really a good setup for that.
It won't be a blizzard. It'll be zombies.
Yeah,
It'll be
zombies. Yeah.
zombies.
I always tell
Right.
everybody
We're
it's a
close to
zombie
it now.
attack. How many people wait? I got a neighbor. I just can't wait for it to turn. Yeah, like selling it. Oh, this is great. No, I'm sure he doesn't know who this is. He doesn't listen to this broadcast. At least I hope. Anyway, but we joke about that all the time, but it's true. And I mean, I think everybody has that.
I do live on the east side, so I think the zombie apocalypse may have already begun.
Yeah. And you have to fight your way to get here.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's
Yeah.
funny thing out here is just so quiet at night. We jokingly say if you hear gunfire, it's somebody sighting in. That's it. So, but and I think the thing about Black Moon Manor is, and I give the devil his due again. This guy did a lot of research. he made a backstory. It's pretty impressive. It almost looks like something out of an intelligence community. I mean, he
And
wrote
then
one
jumbled everything together and made
Yeah.
something
He's
else.
got an active
And got people
imagination.
to
I'll certainly
believe
say
it.
that for
Yeah,
him.
you got people to believe it.
Yeah.
That's the key. Part of it's construct, and the other part of it's getting them to buy it.
Right.
And he obviously got some people, including Ghost Adventures. I'm not saying anything there, folks,
Yeah.
but they bought it. Yeah.
They did. I wanted to mention something about something Mia mentioned earlier about the funeral parlor. There was a discussion that there was a funeral parlor that was an addition to the house.
Yeah.
So the Estes family were business owners. They owned no less than 2 businesses in Mount
Sure.
Comfort. They were also farmers.
Yeah.
So
Now, what business do they own again?
they own stores. So basically
Okay.
general type stores.
Yeah. Mercantiles. Okay.
Correct.
Yes.
So that area that supposedly was a funeral parlor was not. It was actually meant as a feed and grain storage area,
Yes.
almost like a warehousing for their
Yeah.
stores.
Okay.
So that's actually what happened with that. I did also want to talk a little bit about the cemetery. So
Okay.
we walked it again this morning before we came here. So this is definitely an older historic cemetery, and the burials go back about 180 years, are the earliest burials.
Sure.
As such, it's a really pretty place. It's void of trees, unfortunately. Somebody went in and cut down all the shade trees, which is always
Odd.
unfortunate.
Yeah.
But it borders woods. Those woods seem to be growing into the cemetery, actually. But because it's 180 years old and some of the stones, some of them are illegible, some of them are rubbed. You can't
Sure.
read the text from the weathering. Stones are missing. Some of them have bases only in the stones, so you know that the stone should be there.
Broken in
Yeah.
half. Yeah.
There's signs of vagrancy, and who knows? I mean, their rumor was that there were cult type activities, and again, we don't know that for a
Could
fact.
be. Then again,
Rumor.
a lot of people automatically anything like that they consider blasphemous. They
Yes.
look at it and go, "Oh, that's the occult. They're devil worshippers." Yeah.
Now we do suspect that there may be additional burial sites back in the woods that we can't actually see. Now, there are a couple really old gravestones that are in the tree line and actually slightly inside of it.
Yeah.
The
Kind of
point,
reminds me of the Bell Witch
Yeah.
situation. If you go down there, the cemetery where it ends, if you go back in the woods, you'll find actually the Bell himself. His grave is back in the woods in the weeds.
the thing is, there are very prominent family members who nobody knows where their burial sites are. They believe that it's actually in this cemetery, but there's
Okay.
no signs. So, for example, John P. Eastus, he was the son of Obadiah and Francis that we talked about earlier. He
Yeah.
passed away at age 90 at the Poor Farm in Hancock County. We were able to find the grave marker for his wife. We were able to find the grave marker for his daughter, Rachel.
Okay.
But
But not him.
not him, and there is a spot next to her. So we don't
Maybe
know
he
if
didn't get a stone.
maybe he couldn't afford a stone. He was in the
That
poor
could be.
farm.
Yeah. Most of us are put in paupers' graves, so
Yes.
wouldn't surprise you. Yeah.
Correct. So the thing is, there are very prominent family members that are just missing. I also wanted to give you a side note for Dr. Harvey. So he later, once he did leave,
We did decide your research showed he was a real person, obviously.
he was a real person.
Yeah.
He actually, when he left, this would have been about 1859
Yeah.
or so. He made the very long trip to Indianapolis. He did not make it to Chicago, but what he did do,
That was a trip back then.
That was a trip.
Yeah.
That was a trip. He is actually known as pretty much the modern architect of what is now the Department of Health in the state of Indiana.
Wow.
So, so he did something really important, and he's buried in Crown Hill Cemetery, which is the large cemetery here.
Sure.
So he's definitely very much a real person. I definitely wanted to just go to 2012 real quick.
Okay.
So at this point, Mr. Estes decided enough was enough. The family had been dragged through the mud. He didn't want
After
them to...
the Ghost Adventures.
Yes.
That was out there.
That is actually
Yeah.
what caused him to become
Yes.
aware.
Oh yeah, nationally televised show.
It'll do
And
that.
Yep.
He didn't even know the extent of what was going on. He thought it was being used for storage,
Sure.
of course. And there are reports of neighbors actually calling him or being upset, at
Yes.
least, about the family's name being dragged through the mud.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, the first time I met Matt, there was a lady named Danielle who had organized a well, I won't say paracon, really wasn't. It was like a meet and greet at the Hannah House for all paranormal groups.
Oh, okay.
And this has been years and years ago. And our group came out because we were invited as one of the older teams in Indiana. And there was a guy at the time running Ghost Trackers named George. George called me. He said, "You get the call?" I said, "Yeah, I got it." I said, "You going?" He says, "Well, yeah, me and a few people." He says, "You?" And I said, "Yeah, same thing, me and a few people." We went out there. And I hate to say it, but, this is not a children's show, so I'm going to put it right out there. The fact is, it was kind of a dick measuring contest. We got out there, and there was like 12 groups. They all walked around trying to figure out who had the best equipment, who had the best methodology, who had the best evidence. And really, there wasn't a lot of public. And they did this yearly, and we stayed with it about 3 years. And Danielle was a sweet lady. She tried every world. She had visions of making a governing body for all the paranormal groups in Indiana, that they could use this for lobbying legislation and everything else. She had grandiose plans that just never came about. But anyway, when I met Matt, he had came out, I'm going to say the third year we were there, and set up a booth trying to convince people to come out and do investigations. And, he's charged X amount. And he was really out there for the groups, not the people who were coming in, the general public.
Right.
I talked to him and his lady that were sitting there. And, he asked me, he said, "Would you guys come out?" And I said, "Well, we'll take a look at it. Right now, our schedule, we had enough open cases. And when I say open cases, we do go to some sites that we required to pay to get in. Okay, we do those because they're active. It helps hone our skills. It's fun. And we can say we've been there.
Right,
and also
right.
that becomes a podcast subject, a subject for my book coming up. It could be a lot of things. But at that time, we had enough caseload that we really couldn't get in there. We said, "Hey, we'll keep it under, keep it." But by then, I knew people at Hannah. Hannah was giving me free access. We were in there. And if you don't, go back in the early part of season 3, I think it's either episode 1 or 2 is Hannah House. We were in and out there free. We were in and out a lot of places free. We didn't really have the time to pay, nor the resources. So, when I met him next year, he was out there again, and he was really pushing this. Now, I know George and Ghost Trackers, I think, went out there. Dennis of South Indy Paranormal went out there. They're not around anymore. I know Mary and Sean and 911 Paranormal went out there. We had a lot of people. We just never went. And it wasn't because I felt something suspicious. We just didn't have the time. And by the time that, we got to the point we had the time, suddenly this was shut down. They were tearing down the mansion. They were trying to keep everything quiet. I think there were so many people that were offended or had been offended. They just wanted this quiet. And it kind of went away. That's kind of the impression I got.
And it's funny you mention that because that's pretty much how this ends up.
Absolutely.
So Mr. Estes was more about the family land than he was about the house.
Sure.
The house was basically, it was historic, but
It goes back to reputation.
It goes back to reputation. It pretty much, he needed it to stop. So it is definitely well documented that he wanted the house to stay in its current state if it could be moved. So he did offer Matt the opportunity to move the house. He was going to give him the house if he was able to move it, but the resources weren't there.
Well, no,
So
moving a house is egregiously...
it's like $50,000 at least.
Yeah.
So that didn't happen. And
It'd be
so
easier to take it apart and build it somewhere else. I mean, yeah.
Right.
Yes. So since that didn't happen, he had the house demolished towards the end of 2012, I believe. And so basically Black Moon Manor was no more. He wanted to preserve the family land.
And honestly, there's nothing really wrong with the house structurally. It was
Correct.
safe. But he took it down because he was just tired of the BS.
Yeah.
I mean, he came
You don't
with
want to
it.
mess with it no more.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's understandable.
Well, and after it's on Ghost Adventures, which,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when
That
I
sets it
started
apart.
watching paranormal shows, like, well, the Ghost Adventures.
Well, and it
right?
gave,
It's
gave
right
people
there.
a destination. That's the other
Right.
problem. You get a situation where
Yeah,
people
then
suddenly said,
if you-
"Hey, we need to go there."
If you
Right.
kick them out, then the guy
Yeah.
can be empty, and that sets
Well,
it
you
up
know,
for
when we start doing
vagrants
research,
and looters.
yeah, yes, very much so. And you know, you get people that want to collect pieces of the house. You know, I've had a lot of people ask me. They said, you know, I have a piece of concrete from 9/11. I collected when I was there. And a lot of people say, "Oh my God, what's that worth?" I don't know. I've never priced it. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not like that. It's a keepsake for me. It's a memory I'll pass on to my kids, and you know, it'll pass down through the line. You know, I think that in the long term of things, Mr. Estes understood it. You know, it's about family. We got to tear the house down to put a stop to this, because if not, the next guy. Because once it hit national TV,
Oh, yeah. It was
you know,
so huge.
yeah, you get mad out there. You get the next group in who wants to. Oh, I'd like to rent this for storage.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and
right.
you know, it was just going to be a never-ending project.
Absolutely.
You
And
know?
living out of state, too.
Yeah,
And
you're not there to control it. You don't want to move in to control it. You're happy where you're at.
Yeah.
I understand. you
I
know?
will say that when we were doing the research for this, we did go onto YouTube and we did watch a lot of live footage of different groups
Yeah.
that were in the house. So definitely, I'm not going to say that there wasn't something happening, because
Sure.
I honestly believe there was. There were things that were happening in the house. There were very clear
and-
EVPs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were actually some live pieces of audio that were not from an EVP that were spoken.
Sure.
And so that takes a lot of energy.
Well,
like
and
extraordinary
let's
amount.
talk about this a minute. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, okay, cut out all the BS that Matt brought in.
Yeah.
If you look at what really happened there, okay, from the SDs over the years, they lost at least one child, maybe more. A lot of people, when they had stillborns and things, they didn't talk about them.
There were infants in the graveyard.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
yeah.
So, for sure.
Lots
So-
of infants, lots of children.
1920s, you had the
5.
Spanish flu,
And then you got the
1940s,
grief
smallpox.
from the loss.
Oh, yeah, and that's
That'll paint. That'll
A
fill it
lot
up.
of
Oh,
the
yes.
graves too will say, you know, wife of or husband of, and they
Yeah.
died at like 24 or 25.
Yeah,
Very, very
I
young.
mean, back then the mortality rate was almost zero because of the fact of the conditions that they acquired.
You mean almost 100?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm
Not
sorry,
zero.
not 0, 100. Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm sorry. Yeah, but that's true. I mean, when you get to it in the long term of things, so there's a lot there that could. I mean, we're not going to say the house wasn't haunted. The house was haunted, just not with the backstory that Matt had.
Right.
Matt
Correct.
did not.
They
Matt
didn't
brought it
line
in falsehood. He was not accurate. He led together. You know, I'm not saying the house was haunted. The house didn't give EVPs. I think it did. The problem was it just wasn't the right background.
He went about it the wrong way.
Yeah.
What I
Well-
take? Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wasn't there video of a rocking horse in
Yes.
Rachel's room?
Yes. Moving
which
on its
is-
own.
Which is weird because Rachel died before the house was built.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
you know, but if the rocking
it-
chair's moving on its own, or rocking horse, excuse
It
me.
Maybe it wasn't Rachel.
Yeah.
It could have been hers before they built the house, and they just put it in there.
Right. You
I
never
mean, there's
know.
a lot
Objects.
of things. The problem is I always tell people this. When we go right now, I'm dealing with a client that called in, and he originally lived in Irvington. He moved down to Greenfield. Okay, and he believes he took the entities with him that were haunting him. The problem is when you start through research, you know. And I guess me and Heather, and probably you guys, I know you guys do a few guard sales and things. We go to a lot of antique malls, everything else, and buy stuff. You're always possibility of bringing something home. You know, of course, our mirror is
Sure.
the clean example of that.
There you go.
So, you know, it very easily could have been the rocking horse that passed through time and came to the new location. Then again, it may have had nothing to do with it. You know, of course, the other thing is this whole area was renowned for American Indian burial grounds.
Right.
So they were scattered and spotted all over. It could be part of that. I mean, the
Yes.
problem is research can only do so much. And Eric is one of our research assistants. I know you've ran a ton of research in the past on different things, helping Jennifer out, and you both have worked together well. Mia, this is kind of your first run at this, doing a little research outside of your normal realm. So was it fun?
It was fun. You know, it was nice to go to the cemetery and see the names and
Yeah.
figure out who belonged to who and find out what their story was. So it's actually a really good story
Yeah. It just, unfortunately, I always tell people when I do my workshop lectures.
Yeah,
we do those. And if you didn't know that, I do speak at libraries. I only in Indiana. I won't go outside the state unless you pay all my way in my hotel. But, we do these different classes. You can find them on the PR on our website, www.spiritindiana.com. And one of them we do, I always tell people is, I said, the fun thing is, when you delve into something, we did one here recently, and I don't remember if it was Rhodes or Whispers, but Jennifer found out there was a preacher involved that supposedly committed suicide at the scene. We found out the man lived his entire life, moved to Michigan, and lived out his life.
Yeah.
Research makes, and people don't realize how important research is a cog in the machine that drives your parapsychology research. And you will find that when you look at stuff, things will come up you didn't know about. And then, too, sometimes you find things that was never told in folklore or in the legend. And, it's very, very important. I consider it a very, very big cog of everything that goes on. I think that, Black Moon Manor, unfortunately, is a victim of circumstance. You got some guy that was looking to make a buck, and, he put it together. And unfortunately, people go, well, if they were really good at parapsychology, they wouldn't have been fooled. No, that's not true. And I don't, very rarely, you'll ever, matter of fact, I think it's the only time you've ever hear me defend the ghost adventures. But, when we get people all the time go, oh, my house is haunted. Okay. My best one's when they call the line and go, I have a demon. Really? That's good. The Catholic Church would love this, because there's like one demon in 50 years it appears. Suddenly you have a demon, and it generally isn't that way. Everyone calls as a demon. And, it's a funny thing. I said, you want to see a real demon? Let me show you my ex-wives. Anyway, but, had to throw that one in. But, honestly, the bottom line is, people don't realize it. So they come in under the pretense, this is the back history. Right. Had they done research, they'd have figured that out. They'd have realized, okay, and maybe Ghost Adventures done some research while they were at the...
They did, and allegedly they just said, yeah, and like pushed it aside.
Exactly. It didn't match, so it didn't work for the show.
And ready to film.
That's the thing. Bad thing about working with anybody in the show, we did a broadcast... Oh, hell, I don't remember. It's been some years back for a radio show and a YouTube show. Gentleman was on WIBC, and he contacted me and said, the oldest group in Indy, will you guys come out and do a thing for October? Of course, this month, which is being taped in October, is our famous month. My God, everybody wants to talk to us. So we get these calls, and they go, well...
Spooky month.
Spooky month, yeah. And we come to mind. So immediately, we get a lot of PR requests, and we do a lot of lecture workshops. And one of the things that came about, he says, we want you guys to do a live investigation on scene. Now, I'm not going to tell you his name because we get along with him. I think he's still out there. He's still out there in PR. He doesn't do the show he used to do. Now he's moved on. I think he's in another station. But anyway... He did this morning show, so we're doing this evening, haunting. The client, I think, did a lot of drugs. I was pretty sure he did. He was more happy than the rest of the group was. I'll tell you that. It was a nasty fall night. It got very cold. We were there with a van that we had for monitoring, and we had a pretty good crew. And I remember Andrew, my chief of staff, hates being on air.
Right.
And so.
He hid behind everything he could
find.
Including
me several times. And
I've seen this.
Yeah.
He's awfully tall.
If you've seen the video, it's like, what the hell are you doing there? Get out of there. And, he hated to be on video. But this guy, the whole time, he had the crew, he'd go over and shove a rocking chair and then have the crew film it. I go, no, we're not doing that. If you want to do that shit, go find you another house. The owner, after he told us what all had been happening, went out on the front porch and went to sleep in a comatose state. And we couldn't wake him when we left. I just put the keys in his hand and said, okay, not my problem, because the radio station made the arrangements with him. But, he passed out on the front porch, basically.
Okay.
So we go in to do this haunting. We got a neighbor. It's a half-double. They've converted to half-double. The neighbor was not, and the neighbor kept knocking on the wall going, did you find anything yet? Uh-huh. It worked well. But anyway, this whole thing was a chaotic thing. And I remember Andrew at some point toward the end of the night, I was so frustrated. And I stand there kind of stewing. And he looked at me and he says, "So was it worth it to get the PR?" And I go, "Don't start that shit. I mean it." And, and oh my God. But yeah, we did that one time. And the problem is to do a real scientific experiment and a survey. You can't really do it with these folks. These folks are all about ratings and my paycheck. And so,
Right.
So anyway, long story short, it happens, and I see where he was blinded by, but the problem is sometimes you can't see the forest for the woods. You just take what they
Right.
tell you. When people call us and go, "We need help," and this is what's going on, that's all we know until we do. But if you don't do the research,
Yes.
you may find your ass hanging out in the wind. I mean,
It's just stories passed down. It's like a huge game of telephone.
exactly.
Yeah.
The
You did
worst
that in
things
school when
Yes.
you were in elementary
Yeah.
school, and what you said by the end was nothing like what you
They
said.
did the same thing in the Navy. They lined about 15, 20 of us up, and it was called scuttlebutt. Any kind of rumor was called scuttlebutt. And they would tell the first person something, and then they had to pass it down the line. By the time you got to the end of the line, it was nowhere near what it started
Exactly.
at. And they proved that point. And I mean, folklore, legends, I always tell people, especially in my book, when you start out when someone says, "I was told," or "it has been said," I cringe, because that's generally folklore. Probably 25% of it's true.
Right.
And you have to take that with a grain of salt when you hear it. And I think this is the case. A lot of groups didn't bother to do the research to see if these things were accurate.
Right.
Had they might have been questioning Matt a little bit,
I will also say that this was a classic case of not a lot of documentation.
Yeah.
You were left with a lot of suppositions.
Sure.
You had to read between the lines. Keeping in mind, back at that time, record keeping in certain counties they were still in their infancy.
Yeah.
They just don't exist.
Well, like
Yeah.
in some places in Kentucky, my dad was born in Albany. They had a courthouse fire there in the 1940s.
Right.
All the records were destroyed. So I mean,
That's
the
what
record
happened to
keeping
the
was loose.
1890 U.S. Census. That there was a repository in Cincinnati that burned.
Yep.
So the 1890 census is pretty much gone.
Yeah, and I mean that happens. I mean it's lost to time, and I'm fortunate we'll never get back.
Yeah. I would just like to say that from this experience, I feel a kinship to the family.
Sure.
I have no ties to them whatsoever, but by doing the research, I feel like we got a chance to really look in and learn a little bit about this family, and I feel a sense of sadness and regret that they had to go through this, because they were a very proud family, and their reputations got soiled and tarnished. And quite honestly, I'll just call it out. I really want to do what I can do to help make sure that they have a better situation. And honestly, the first thing I would ask is that the Public Works Department in Hancock County actually take the time to clean this cemetery up, to straighten this cemetery up, and give them a shredded dignity, because they're owed at least that.
Yeah, if you're in a public works anywhere, you deserve to restore the cemeteries.
Yeah.
Those folks lived. It was I don't remember what it was. It was a poem that one time was released in Freemasonry. It was about Masonic homes, and it talked about this lady pushing a gentleman she really didn't know much about. When she started researching him, this guy won tons of awards. He was a veteran. He was a war hero, and there was so much there. But he was unable. He had become somewhat of a vegetable. But unfortunately, the guy was really somebody to think about. I mean, a lot of times we don't respect our past or our people. And I mean, I feel sorry for the Estes. I mean, this was really a bad situation. And it could have been handled a lot better, but it ended up the way it did, and I really hated to see it. But
Yeah.
people need to know about it. I mean, there are not every place. I always tell everybody, every old building is creepy. It's not always haunted, and you got to be careful. And research is such a very important cog on this. You guys did a good
Right.
job. I mean, this was a really good episode. I think it really helps everybody understand. I always go through and say that 70% of hauntings is plumbing issues. Plumbing
True.
or electrical. And I mean,
True.
You need to know. I
The
mean, we can
light's
sit here all
flickering.
Is that what's
Exactly.
happening at our house?
Yeah, until you change the light bulb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Fair enough.
So, I mean, you have to look at it and say, hey, there are places out there that are not haunted, but were thought to be haunted.
Right.
And if you keep believing the legend, now that the house is gone, you're going to be walking down that same alley that, has no end.
Now, I mean, some people did say, they got EVPs, they got a necklace was pulled or something.
Sure.
And I think somebody even claimed someone in their group was possessed. I mean, that was
and
maybe drugs.
A demon, let me guess.
Yeah, a demon.
It was
A
a
can of
demon.
Narcan could solve
It
that.
was hanging
It was
out
a demon.
everywhere, but well, I'll be honest with you, though, I do believe there was paranormal activity there.
Sure.
I don't think it was related to anything that Matt brought up, but I think
The
there was
Indians.
It could be. It could go back to Indians. It could go
probably
back to
Indians.
some of the children that passed. There's a
Yeah.
whole lot here that could be.
Sure.
And to do the right research and do it correctly, that makes all the difference.
And now this is Walter Estes, is the man who owns the property now.
Currently, yeah.
Currently, that lives in Ohio, but he's 79, I believe, but he didn't want any part of anything paranormal. He's
Sure.
a very big skeptic. He's got a
And
very
through everything he's been through,
scientific-
you can understand that.
Well, and he's got a very scientific background.
Sure.
He actually is like a PhD in physical chemistry
Wow.
or something.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
he does a lot of computer work and computer sciences.
So that would
computer
undermine
chemistry,
his
all
whole
that. Yeah,
career.
Yes.
absolutely.
It's understandable.
So he didn't want anything to do with it. He's, I'm sure, someone that if he saw something that was actually paranormal, he would maybe make up a way.
Sure.
He'd rationalize it.
Yeah,
He'd
rationalize it. Yeah,
rationalize
it'd be-
it. Exactly.
Well, it's a fantastic. I tell you what, this episode was fantastic. I think everybody will enjoy it. You guys did good work.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything they want to? Heather, Mia,
I'm good.
Eric, anything else you want to put in
No.
before we close this?
No?
Okay, so folks, tonight's episode I think was worthwhile. I think it shows that their research is a very important part of everything. So that's the conclusion for tonight's episode of Ghost to Ghost. We hope you enjoyed this episode. The episode of Ghost Story of the Day, Ghost to Ghost was written by Eric and Mia Kerr. It's now time for the Ghost Story of the Day with Eric.
Today's selection comes from Haunted Indiana, Ghosts and Strange Phenomena of the Hoosier State by James A. Willis. And we are headed to my neck of the woods, far east Indianapolis, for a story called The Blue Lady. In the roaring 20s, Pendleton Pike through McCordsville was a hotbed of activity, with everyone from locals to gangsters traveling up and down it. So when the Plantation Club was erected at the corner of West Pendleton Pike and Carroll Road, it soon became the place to be. Before long, gangsters moved in, attracting all sorts of shady dealings, from illegal gambling and alcohol smuggling to prostitution. It is even said that John Dillinger himself would stop in from time to time to unwind when he was between jobs. Despite, or maybe because of, all the illegal activity, the Plantation Club thrived and soon began to expand. The property grew to include almost 50 acres. Several small cabins were erected around a lake on the property so that the ladies of the evening who worked the club could entertain their clients away from the prying eyes of the general public. It was at one of those cabins where the legend of the Blue Lady was born. According to the legend, one of the prostitutes who worked there was entertaining a client inside one of the cabins when something went wrong, dreadfully wrong. Exactly what happened is unknown, but when it was over, the young woman was dead. Word quickly spread among the other prostitutes that if they knew what was good for them, they would keep their mouths shut about the murder and just go back to business as usual. The murdered girl, or rather her ghost, had other ideas. Almost immediately after the woman's death, her ghost began making appearances in and around the cabin. Stranger still, her ghost always appeared to be bathed in a weird blue mist. Not wanting to get in any trouble, the other working girls quietly began avoiding the cabin and would only speak in hushed tones among themselves about the Blue Lady. Once alcohol became legal again, and the FBI started cracking down on gangsters, fewer people started showing up at the Plantation Club. Eventually, it fell into disrepair and was abandoned. In the 1960s, Chuck Nickerson saw opportunity in the property and purchased it, turning it into an events facility that could hold up to 35,000 people. Nickerson even had rides installed throughout the property and built a pavilion alongside the lake near the infamous Blue Lady cabin. Apparently, the Blue Lady approved the pavilion because the ghost started showing up there, much to the chagrin, or in some cases, excitement of the guests. In January 1988, Donnie and Michael Nickerson purchased the entire property with the intent of restoring it to the way it was during the days of the Plantation Club. After several major renovations, the property was once again open to the public, this time under the name Casinos. It would appear that restoring the property to the style of the Roaring Twenties made the ghosts from that era feel right at home. That's because, shortly after it reopened, strange things began happening inside Casinos. Doors opened and closed on their own, glasses and other objects moved without being touched, and footsteps echoed through the building when no one else was around. As for the Blue Lady, she continued to be sighted on a regular basis, although she preferred to hang out near the lake as opposed to coming inside the building. Casinos, too, would eventually close, and several years ago, all the buildings, including the Blue Lady cabin, were knocked down to make way for a golf driving range. Even that facility was short-lived, and today, nothing remains at the site except a huge vacant lot, a small lake, and a ghost.
Thanks for listening to Ghost to Ghost. Again, I'm your host, Chief Lawson. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats on the 15th and 30th of the month at midnight. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, maybe have a question or subject you'd like to ask about on air, or be used on the show, please email us at ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com, ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com. I want to thank my production staff on Spirit, Jennifer Verne, our research manager and our producer, and Heather Lawson, our trainer on Spirit and our podcast director, for helping make these podcasts possible. My chief of staff, Andrew Brooks, for his guidance and help on the scripts, and everyone else involved. Thank you so much. See you next time. Until then, stay safe and remember the truth is out there. Good night. Ghost to Ghost podcast and its contents is the property of Spirit Paranormal Ltd. All rights reserved. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. You may not, except with written permission, use or distribute its contents for commercial use. Spirit Indiana Paranormal, covering the Hoosier State since 2002, Indy's oldest parapsychology investigation group. If you're experiencing what you believe to be paranormal issues, reach out to us for help at www.spiritindiana.com or call our hotline at 317-883-9103. Again, that is www.spiritindiana.com or our hotline at 317-883-9103. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and the ones you love, and be safe out there.